The November 2020 and February 2021 strategic case study is based on the fictional business of Knowledge City Technology Park. We will shorten that to KCTP. And KCTP, we will see, is operating its business in the area of knowledge parks, research parks, scientific parks, industrial parks, whatever you want to call them. There are a number of different terms we can use. So we'll probably call it a technology park, owner and operator. Okay, and we'll talk about what that means very, very shortly. So over this particular pre-scene, I'm going to go through each page of this document in great detail. And I'll stop along the way to discuss the implications of the information included here. I'll discuss relevant E3, F3 and P3 theories as they relate to this information, and I'll talk about likely exam day scenarios and how you can respond to those. Okay, so let's get right into it. With the introductory section here, we're told that Knowledge City Technology Park is a quoted company that owns and operates a technology park, which is the largest in its home country. Okay, so the park, we're told, is located close to the campus of a leading technological university, although the park's not directly affiliated with the university. We will later see that actually this university is a shareholder in this particular business. So very close link, but not directly affiliated with the university. Knowledge City Technology Park is meant to operate independently from the university, okay? And Knowledge City Technology Park is also located within a 1-hour drive of several other major universities, okay? So let's unpack this first section of the pre-scene. First of all, KCTP is a quoted company, so not a private business, a publicly listed enterprise. And there are pros and cons that come with being a public company. The main pros relate to, first of all, having better access to funding. Okay, so you're not just relying on debt financing, you have access to equity financing, so you can issue shares and raise money in that way. And obviously there are significant reputational benefits with being a publicly listed company. So if you are a member of your stock exchange, the FTSE or the NASDAQ or whatever it is, then you're obviously going to get a lot of press. And the flip side of that, however, is that you get a lot of scrutiny. So you're scrutinized by banking analysts, investors, etc., shareholders themselves of the company, and the general financial press. So the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journals of this world, etc., are likely to be running stories on you and paying more attention to what you do. So you do have to tolerate that. And indeed, you come under pressure from your shareholders because you're expected to provide a return in the form of an appreciating share price and or a dividend payment. Okay, and ideally you would give them two. But often you'll find that with certain stocks, you'll have certain stocks that are growth stocks, so their share price appreciates rapidly. They would be typically, technology companies, early stage startups that show a lot of growth. And they, instead of paying out a dividend, they put all the money back into the business. They invest for future growth. Or you have more stable share prices, so not an appreciating share prices, and then they tend to pay out more in the way of dividends. So we'll see what kind of company KCTP is later in this particular pre-scene because there's a feature on the share price. So they're the pros and cons really of that come with being a publicly listed enterprise. And of course there are regulatory pressures as well, okay, as well as pressure from shareholders, because you need to publish audited financial statements, and you need to ensure that you're obeying the rules of that stock exchange. And we see in the last paragraph of this page that we're told that it is an active and well-regulated stock exchange. So regulation, it keeps companies honest, but obviously there is a cost to adhering to the rules of a well-regulated stock exchange like this one. So mention of universities very early on, and they will be mentioned again and again, okay? And proximity to leading universities is really a key benefit here that a lot of these technology parks offer to tenants that come and rent out space on these technology parks. So you've companies coming and renting out premises on these technology parks so that they can collaborate with one another, but also so that they can access university talent. University talent comes in one of two forms. First of all, you have the professors and academic researchers working at the university. So you might have companies wanting to collaborate with leading professors in certain fields like biotechnology, etc. And also you have access to university talent in the form of future employees. So if the university is reputable and has high standards for its students, it will produce very good graduates who would then go on and work in the companies that are resident in Knowledge City Technology Park, for example. Okay? So very, very important stakeholder universities. Okay? We'll mention them repeatedly throughout this pre-scene. So let's have a look at your role. You're a senior manager in KCTP's finance function. You report directly to the board and you advise on special projects and strategic matters. Clearly, you're moving up in the world. So well done you. If you've come through the operational level and the management level, you would have started out as a lowly finance officer all those years ago. You moved up to the role of manager. And now, look at you. You're a senior manager. You're interacting with the most senior people at the company. So you deal with the board. And as a senior manager, you're going to have a long-term strategic focus. So you're one of the big shots at the company now. You're advising on strategy that plays out over a 3 to 5 year time horizon. Remember, when you were a lowly finance officer at the operational level, you would have been focused very much on day-to-day issues that related to the execution of tasks, so operational aspects of the business. Now you have taken a step back from all of that. You're no longer really involved in the day-to-day. It's more about the long-term strategic decision, deciding on markets to enter into, product categories that you could launch, long-term financing options, etc., and managing risk over the long term. So you've got to show leadership, you've got to deal with the board, you've got to influence them, and you've got to understand the wider context within which your business is operating. So it's no longer sufficient to, well, it never really was with CIMA. CIMA always wants to see a well-rounded finance professional. They don't want someone who makes recommendations with a narrow focus on their business only if it hurts the wider community or if it's slightly unethical. So what they want to see is a well-rounded finance professional who makes very good commercial recommendations and has strong technical financial accounting and management accounting skills, but also is ethical and adheres to the CIMA Code of Ethics. So whenever you're faced with an ethical issue, and you will be on this exam, CIMA loves to test ethical issues at the strategic level especially. So watch out for those and try to refer to the CIMA Code of Ethics. That's a framework that CIMA loves to see being employed when there are ethically questionable things occurring. So make sound commercial recommendations, obviously, but also make sure you're doing the right thing. And also, you know, when it comes to understanding the wider context of your business, I mean, it's important to understand the industry, okay? So a lot of people, a lot of students doubt about the extent to which they should dive into the industry. So my co-founder, Hugo Newman, will talk about that in tomorrow's session. And what he will say is that you don't need to go crazy learning everything about the industry, but certainly it helps to have a high-level overview of what's going on, some of the real-life players, some of the trends that are playing out in this industry, etc. That will really, really help you. Obviously, it will help you because you can be sure that CIMA understands what's happening in the real-life industry, and they are picking their ideas for the exam from the real-life industry, most likely. And if you're aware of some of those trends, you can make more sensible recommendations for your own business if you understand what's going on in the wider industry. But also when I talk about understanding the wider context, it's about considering the community where you're operating. So are there any negative externalities with your business? Is there any pollution or anything like that going on that you need to watch out for? Are you a good employer? Are you a good corporate citizen? Are you considering the interests of stakeholders? And this business is really interacting with a wide range of stakeholders. So we've already mentioned universities. I'll be talking about government. There are the tenants that rent out these facilities, so they're often businesses, but businesses of different types. So we've got big multinationals, we've got very small startups. You've also got research centres that perhaps they don't have a profit motive, so they might be affiliated to universities and things like that. So we're going to have stakeholders that have very different needs. So managing all of those needs is going to be a challenge for KCTP. So I'm flagging that up early on. Managing different stakeholder groups with different needs is an important part of this pre-scene. And in the last part of this first page, KCTP, we're told, is based in Advland. So completely fictional country. We don't really know where it's located. There's no mention of that, but it is a developed country. Okay, so it's got an active and well-regulated stock exchange, and we've talked about some of the challenges with a well-regulated stock exchange. It adds expense, it adds regulatory burden. It's a bit of a drag, but ultimately it's going to be a good thing because there will be strong reputational benefits if you're part of this stock exchange. Investors will realize the companies that are part of this stock exchange are likely to have their houses in order, so probably a good stock to invest in. I can trust the financial statements being produced by companies on this stock exchange because they're closely watched by the regulator. So Advland, the currency is the fictional $8. And this company is expected to prepare financial statements in accordance with IFRS. So that's no surprise to us as management accountants. And just dwelling on this point a little bit longer, the active and well-regulated stock exchange. This kind of reminds me of something that was flagged up in F3, which is the efficient market hypothesis. All right, and you've different forms. You've got weak form or strong form or more medium form, and this might be pointing to strong form efficiency. And the strong form efficient market hypothesis states that a share price will reflect all of the historical data that comes into play when analysing a company. So the previous financial statements and all of that, how the company has done historically, and the publicly available information, press releases that have been released by the company in recent months and weeks, etc. But also the strong form goes further and says that even private information that's held by the directors of the company, etc., because markets are truly efficient, that a share price will reflect all of that information as well. So it's quite an extreme view of the stock market, and it's very, very complementary of the power of the market and the power of share prices. It determines that share prices reflect the true value of a company. Okay, so that's just something to flag up and think about early on. And thinking of the different subjects, E3, F3, P3, which you would have passed as part of the strategic level. Of particular importance with E3 is recommending the right strategic options. Do they line up with the vision and mission of the company, for example? And we'll talk about that later on. And especially I want you to consider digital strategy. Okay, so digital strategy is a big feature of the new 2019 CIMA syllabus, and we'll talk about that throughout this pre-scene. Managing risk for your strategic recommendations is part of P3, and cyber risk is going to be very important in this pre-scene. And finally, with F3, it's all about securing the right kind of long-term funding and having the right kind of financial strategy, balancing the financial strategy between the needs of shareholders who might be pushing for dividends and the need to reinvest in the business, for example. So over the next few pages, we're going to consider technology parks in general. So what are they? What do they do? So we're told that technology parks are sometimes referred to as science parks, and they're areas that are established for companies to come along and conduct scientific or technological research and development. So R&D, part of F2. Remember what I said, it's okay to draw on theories from previous levels, and in fact, it will impress the examiner if you're able to call to mind theory that you have already learned from F2, P2, E2, etc. So, with research and development, generally, research hits the profit or loss statement, with development then probably hitting the intangible assets section of the balance sheet, okay, depending on whether the development that is taking place is likely to lead to probable future economic benefits and is reliably measurable and all of that. Okay, so that's part of IAS 38. Definitely worth reviewing IAS 38 ahead of this exam. So, as I said, you have the ability with All Access to go back to the F2 course, dive into that section and review it in some detail if you need a refresher. So, let's keep that in mind. F2 IAS 38 R&D. So, with R&D, we'll see that with the technology parks, there is a strong need for capital-intensive investment in property, plant and equipment, in the right kinds of technologies and the right kind of assets that these specialist companies will need. Okay, so these companies that come in as residents in the technology parks, technological companies, scientific researchers, biotech companies, etc., they want buildings that are used for science or engineering laboratories, or offices used for design work or software development. So we're seeing a lot of startups come in recent years to science parks. And it's a little bit of a difference perhaps with the traditional companies that would have been residents on technology and science parks before. They would have done more heavy scientific work and engineering work, so they would have required big facilities with specialist equipment, big office spaces or big building spaces required. But in recent times, with software being such a big part of what is driving economic growth in recent years, design work, software development, you can do all of that with smaller teams, and you can certainly carry out that work without having massive office or building spaces, okay? And as well as that, a lot of this work is increasingly being carried out in a remote capacity. And I'm going to mention the coronavirus at this stage because it has actually, I think, quickened the move towards remote work. There's been a general tendency in recent times for people to work more from home, and the coronavirus situation has obviously sped that up, and I think a number of companies will be reconsidering their approach when all of this passes in the next year, 2 years, who knows when. But they might be seeing that people are just as productive when they're working from home, and they give them that ability to work from home. So certainly designers, software engineers, etc., they can often work from home. So that obviously hurts our business. If more and more people are working from home, designers, software engineers, etc., rather than opting for technology parks where they would have offices, etc., it's obviously going to hurt the business of KCTP. We're told that the parks usually offer buildings or offices for rent, with the tenants benefiting from the flexibility of being able to move to larger premises if they need to. The parks, we're told, are designed for flexibility. They're large plots of land, lots of space between buildings, and that's to ensure that the tenants enjoy privacy for research activities, okay? And it also allows these big spaces, allow the scope to extend buildings. So lots of flexibility built in so that you can adapt to tenants' needs as they arise. And I think we're going to see this tension pop up throughout this pre-scene. There's a talk here of, the need for privacy. You've got commercially sensitive, research going on often in these parks. So highly sensitive intellectual property that often companies would want to safeguard. So that's important that there are the right safeguards in place, that they have privacy, that there are protections in place, that there's security on campus, which we'll talk about as well. So there's privacy is important here. There's an extra level of protection here for intellectual property. So probably, in a well-developed country like Advland, there are intellectual property protections in the form of patents, etc. And we've got an added degree of protection being enacted here with the spaces between buildings. And we'll talk as well about the physical security checks that are in place that KCTP has put in place as well. So very important. But we've got this tension between wanting to safeguard and keep for yourself your own intellectual property, and also a desire to collaborate with other tenants, other companies in the technology park. So there's that tension running throughout this pre-scene, and we'll see that companies want to do both. So technology parks are located on sites that are intended to attract significant numbers of organizations. They're looking for a base to conduct their research and development. And location is crucial. There are a number of strategic considerations when it comes to the location of technology parks. So we're going to see that location is absolutely a critical success factor. So let's see what boxes need to be ticked in terms of the location of technology parks. First of all, they need to be located on the outskirts of major cities, where land prices are actually low enough to allow for the construction of big buildings and having big spaces. If you have these in city centre locations, the fees, the property prices would be astronomical. The rents would be astronomical for tenants in the technology parks. It just would not make any economic sense. Now, the fact that the prices are quite low here on the outskirts kind of points to the barriers to entry for park operators like KCTP being lower. Okay, so if prices are low for the land, then you can have anyone coming in and snapping up land and launching their own technology park. But we'll see that that's not quite the case, because investment in property, plant and equipment, so plant and equipment especially, is very, very high. So that raises barriers to entry. Okay, so just something to think about at the moment. Imagine there's a national property bubble in the country of Advland. So obviously city rents and city property prices would rise fastest, the major cities, but also the prices in the outskirts of major cities would rise at the same time. That obviously would be a dangerous situation for our company KCTP, because it might price tenants out of this option. And we've got to remember as well, with technology parks, often they're attracting multinational companies, and companies that could potentially go anywhere in the world to any technology park. So they're not just competing with technology parks in Advland, they're competing with technology parks all over the world. So property prices rise too high, that would be a big problem, I think, for KCTP. So that's the first part of location. Property prices need to be low enough. They tend to be at the outskirts of major cities. Now, they're still close to major conveniences like airports, railway stations, motorways. So you've got easy access to the technology parks. And as I said, these tend to be multinationals, big companies with global presence very often. So you've got people coming in and leaving all the time, flying back to head office at another country or something like that, but popping in for visits on a frequent basis. So they need to have easy access, and it helps that the technology park is close to a major airport. And clearly we're looking again at some of the advantages of being located in a developed country. The infrastructure tends to be good, and undoubtedly it's quite good in Advland as well. And that's obviously a big benefit for a company like KCTP, that the infrastructure in the country is good. So the next element of location is that technology parks tend to be within driving distance of at least one major universities. And the link between universities and technology parks is long-standing. They tend to be established by universities in the first place. So the university is the host institution, so sometimes they'll retain their shareholding That's not the case with KCTP. So initially we'll learn that it was founded by a university, but the university then listed it on at the stock exchange and only retains a 20% shareholding currently. So major advantages linked with, being close to universities, because you can actually talk to academics at the university, specialists in the fields that tend to be attracted to these technology parks. So biotechnology, technology, engineering, etc. And also you've got the graduates of the university representing a good, pipeline of potential workers at the tenants of the technology park. So key stakeholder of the university. And let's think about the needs of a university in relation to technology parks. First of all, they have a need for funding. So often you'll have universities wanting to collaborate very closely with the commercial players that are tenants on the technology parks. And they collaborate with them because universities are often short of cash, but companies tend to have more of it. And if they can hit on some mutually beneficial idea, then you'll often have a company funding research, because you'll have a very expert person working at the university, and they'll fund their research into some topic. Obviously, you have the graduates there that potentially go on to work for a number of these companies in the technology parks, and that's what the university wants as well. They want to provide their graduates with the possibility of working at good companies, and that will then in turn lead to making it easier to attract future students at the university, because you can say, look, 90% of our graduates go and work in major companies in the technology park. And we'll see later on that the university that established KCTP still has a 20% shareholding, and many universities have shareholdings in these technology parks. Okay, so very key stakeholder whose needs we need to consider throughout. And the final part of the location is that technology parks should form a hub for new ideas. They need to exploit synergies and offer the potential for collaboration. So remember what I said there before. There's this tension running through the pre-scene that the tenants of technology parks, they want to kind of closely protect their intellectual property, but also there's this desire to collaborate with other tenants. So there's that tension all the way through that we need to think about. But if it's done well, they can do the both. So they can protect their intellectual property until such a point that they feel it's more beneficial to share it with a trusted partner, so that they can look into exploiting synergies, coming together, sharing intellectual resources. One will have a strength that the other one lacks, and they can basically come up with something that is commercially viable more quickly in that way. So tenants, we're told, are often startup companies whose founders are entrepreneurs, and they want to turn some idea that they've had into something that is commercially viable, that they can sell, okay? And these companies tend to be funded by venture capital. So you'll often have venture capitalists, they'll bet on maybe 20 companies and maybe one of them will make it and 19 of them will fail, but the one that makes it makes them billions of dollars. So really with startups, high risk companies really, and the chance of failure in the early years is very, very high. That obviously has implications for our business, because there's a risk that these companies will fail and they won't pay their rent, and there'll be a lot of churn with companies falling away and new companies coming in. So there's this need to attract new companies all the time, because that that's the startups currently that are tenants could fail at any moment and disappear. So that risk is somewhat countered by the availability of funding. So venture capitalists, will be bankrolling these startup founders. They'll pay for their rent at the technology park. So there is that. Technology parks also attract tenants who are subsidiaries of major corporations. So these are more stable. These are more stable tenants. Good news for our business. And these subsidiaries will often want to draw upon expertise from local universities. So collaboration with academics, very, very important. And often, these little teams of researchers from major corporations, they'll be given more freedom to work on ideas. And they'll be kind of separated from the head office, and they'll be able to explore their ideas with a degree of freedom they wouldn't have if they were back at head office. So we're seeing a diverse customer base here. We've got startups, high risk, but potentially very, very high growth. And you've more established corporations here as well. So you've got portfolio diversification for KCTP, which is a part of E3. So we're generally talking about buildings in the technology parks that are very, very big, and they're designed to be equipped and adapted to meet different needs. So we have the picture of, some big mechanical element that's been worked into one of the buildings here. Looks like a very, very big warehouse space. And the companies that come in here, they need the ability to adapt these spaces quite easily. So the buildings are customizable to the specific needs of tenants. And that allows for KCTP to attract a very wide range of companies, because they can fulfill their needs by adapting these buildings. They have the permission to do that. We're told that tenants require a steady and reliable electrical supply that doesn't have the usual fluctuations that you and I face with our electricity supply, with current and voltage. So some tenants, for example, use a sensitive electronic equipment that could be damaged by spikes, whereas other tenants operate equipment that draw significant electrical current, so that could create spikes. So how do you kind of even that out so that the one that needs a spike and that the other, a spike could really do damage to their equipment, that both of their needs are met. So obviously the technology parks, they can't just rely on the standard electricity supply that we all rely upon. They need to go further and invest heavily in the right kind of infrastructure. So they need systems that distribute the electricity evenly across the campus. So they need to fit and maintain equipment that prevents changes to voltage and the available current. So this is specialized equipment going beyond the basics here. And obviously there's a risk to business operations here already with the electricity supply. P3, thinking of risks and how to manage them. An unreliable power source could completely disrupt business operations and lead to a loss of power, which would lead to a loss of a lot of money for these businesses, even if it was just down for a number of hours. So certainly this is an important area to invest in. And we're seeing here, technology parks, they must invest heavily. So while the property themselves are not exactly cheap because they're massive properties, but relatively inexpensive compared to, say, city centre locations, where the real investment comes is in the infrastructure, the equipment, the plant, etc., rather than the property themselves. So how do you raise the financing for this heavy investment in technology, in plant, in equipment, in this infrastructure? So as I said, you've got debt, you've got equity. We'll see later on that the debt of this company is not actually all that high. So that points to the company having used equity financing. And when we talk about their stock exchange listing, there's mention of the company drastically improving its infrastructure. So they used that listing to raise finance to invest heavily in infrastructure. But that listing was a number of years ago already. So it might be the case that their infrastructure is in need of upgrading. And as well as the initial investment, obviously you've got a lot of ongoing expense. So we're talking here about not just installing equipment, specialized equipment, we're talking about maintaining that equipment. So significant repair costs and maintenance expenses that are part of the operational expenses of KCTP. Okay, so we've talked about the needs of universities. We're going to talk about tenants' needs now, okay? So another vital stakeholder, group of stakeholders, the companies obviously that reside here, the primary customers of KCTP, the startups and the subsidiaries of major corporations. First of all, they need high-speed data links. So they're sending a lot of information, digital information, back and forth between maybe head office in another country and the subsidiary on campus, or maybe they're sharing information with partners at nearby universities, etc. So they're sharing very, very large files with heavy components such as video, etc. Obviously, as well, there's a need to interact remotely now more than ever with people in other locations, in other countries, at different subsidiaries of the company around the world, for example, with investors in other countries that have invested in your startup. So video conferencing is a very important part of life now more than ever, and it needs to be high definition video. So not just any video link will cut it, because often these companies are showing off prototypes in operation. So that obviously requires high definition video so that your investors or the board of directors in another country or whatever it is can see what's going on clearly. Again, we've got a risk here from P3, cybersecurity risk. First time I'm really touching on this. So think about the reputational damage that could occur for KCTP if their systems were hacked and data was actually stolen, highly sensitive data, which we'll talk about next, commercially very sensitive, but also could be data that has national security importance. So often governments will contract out certain jobs to the tenants at these technology parks. So very, very commercially sensitive, also sensitive from a national security point of view. So if this data was hacked, it would be a really, really big blow to KCTP's reputation. It would really put people off coming to the park. So they need to be very careful from a cybersecurity point of view. One idea that occurs early on is white hat hackers. So white hat hackers actually is a term that's mentioned in the CIMA syllabus, P3, under cybersecurity. And employing white hat hackers to actually point up weaknesses in your systems so that the black hat hackers actually don't get their they don't expose weaknesses in your infrastructure, your digital infrastructure. Okay, so as I said, site security very, very important as well. So it's not just about digital security, it's about site security. So it's about physical security, because tenants may be working on the development of new products using designs that are commercially sensitive. Some tenants may be working on government contracts that involve concerns about national security. Tenants generally require there to be security patrols and closed circuit television monitoring of the campus. So you've got these physical security checks in place. Very, very important that they're in place, as well as your digital protections. So you've got building alarms, you've got emergency services on standby, etc. So we're talking about, the older threats of, break-ins and things like that, people accessing buildings in an illegal fashion. So government is also a very important stakeholder here. You've got, the desire to create jobs. So a lot of these technology parks were started with government approval. So you'd have collaboration between universities, which are often public, and government funding as well as a major part of getting a lot of these technology parks off the ground. They know that if they invest in these technology parks, that over the years jobs will be created, high-tech companies will be attracted, that will play into the knowledge economy. Okay, so you might be an economy that is looking to diversify away from older industry, from agriculture, from other segments of the economy. You want to become a more forward-thinking country in terms of the economy that you have. And obviously, there is the need for taxation. So governments obviously are interested in corporate tax, the potential taxes that employees will be paying as well. So they are, the needs that a government has. So we've talked about university stakeholders and their needs. We've talked about the tenants themselves, startups, the subsidiaries of major corporations, etc., their needs, and government needs as well. Some tenants then require administrative and other business service support so that they can focus their attention on research and development work. For example, many technology parks have centralized telephone answering services with operators who pick up calls to tenants' numbers, giving the tenants business names and transferring calls or taking messages as necessary. Okay. So, share services we have here. Okay. So, KCTP, we will see, offers these services to startups in particular who, they want to focus on the thing that they do well. So making the products or designing software that they can sell to the market. They don't want to get too distracted with administrative tasks like this. So this is a way for companies to draw on the expertise of a company like KCTP to outsource these services to KCTP, and it would reduce the number of distractions that they have, and it reduce their operating costs of doing business. Okay, so tenants are also generally keen to ensure that their staff find it convenient to work on the site. One major issue is the availability of sufficient car parking to ensure that staff can park easily, regardless of the time of day. It is helpful, we're told, if there are facilities to secure bicycles and frequent bus services from the technology park to local public transport hubs and airports. So they're making things easy for the tenants of the parks, as I say, to access airports, etc., which it's very, very important that they're close to them. Next up, we have mention of technology parks offering small and medium-sized spaces to suit the needs of smaller operators. So generally what we'll see is that the buildings are hired out to bigger organizations. So organizations conducting big scientific and engineering projects. They need big spaces that are adaptable to their needs. They install specialized equipment, etc. But you have software engineers, startups that work with software. They have much more basic needs in terms of the office facilities that are being rented. And what happens is you have small spaces and medium-sized spaces that are adapted to the needs of these software engineers. Smaller spaces are provided so they can get their heads down and work on using software for computer simulations. You've got computer-aided design, assisting designers, etc. So these spaces, these smaller spaces, are popular with startups. Okay, they don't have as much money, obviously, to rent out big spaces. So the more established companies will be doing that. And you mentioned here of computer-aided design. You've mentioned of 3D printing technology. So certainly, I think KCTP could look into investing in 3D printing. That would be something that would be likely to be attractive for the tenants on the park. So if they could, design something on their computers and send it to KCTP to print, that's something that you could probably charge a premium price for. So customizable spaces, again, we're seeing that can be adapted to the specific needs of tenants. Again, mentioning that it allows you to attract a wide range of businesses with different needs. And of course, we're seeing here the importance of all things digital, software, design, computer simulations, computer-aided design, 3D printing, all reliant on ones and zeros, digital technologies, not so heavyweight, not taking up much space, but this is increasingly the way things are going. So digital strategy must fit into the overall strategy of KCTP. Okay, so a wide range of tenants being attracted. We'll see that from the graph below. We've got engineering companies, we've got information and computer technology tenants, we've got biotech tenants, we've got consultants, computer science and hardware and electronics. Okay, now some parks actually specialize in just one niche. Okay, and we'll see in the real life industry tomorrow that there's mention of 2 real life technology parks, and we'll see that they have specialized in one niche. So there's one park in Barcelona that is specialized, for example, in biotechnology. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because if you focus on one particular area, I think, it's easier to attract other tenants then. So if you've got all biotechnology companies and researchers in one place, it's easier to attract other biotechnology companies, because there's a kind of an ecosystem that builds up there. You can draw on the expertise of people who are all pulling in the same direction, doing similar things. And also from a marketing point of view, I think it would be easier to say, to target just one segment instead of trying to, segment according to this particular pie, and you're trying to target 5 different types or 6 different types of tenants with 6 different sets of needs. It would be easier to target just one particular segment. So just something to keep in mind. And consultants, we're told here, they're not actually carrying out any research and development themselves. Instead, they're there to sell their services to third parties. So they're there to sell their consulting services to these other segments. Okay? And some tenants, we're told, go beyond research and development. They actually do a little bit of manufacturing in a very, very limited way. So they operate what are called clean rooms in certain buildings that are used to manufacture limited quantities of products for sale to third parties. And, they're only developing prototypes. So it's not mass manufacturing, because the rents are still quite high in these technology parks, even though we've talked about, them being on the outskirts of cities, etc. If you wanted to conduct manufacturing, you would go even further outside the city to a lower cost location and open a big factory. So it wouldn't actually be cost effective given the rents for companies to mass manufacture here. But you can develop prototypes. And what we're seeing here is that rents really are a significant source of revenue for technology parks. And that, I think, points to the need for KCTP to consider diversifying their revenue streams a little bit. So, there'll be talk about business services, the shared service centre that we talked about before, offering administrative services to startups, etc. That's a good start in looking to diversify away from just relying 100% on the rents that your tenants pay. And we're told that Advland has 27 technology parks here spread across the country. So looks like perfect competition. There's a lot of competition in Advland itself, even though our company is the biggest technology park. But also we need to consider that KCTP is competing with technology parks from other countries as well. Okay, so you're looking to attract multinational players. You're looking to attract agile startups that could go to any one of a number of countries. And prospective tenants, we're told, are attracted by the possibility of collaborating with other tenants based in the technology park. This collaboration could take any one of a number of different guises. So it could be the direct provision of paid service. So you've got the consultants coming here, offering their consultancy services directly to the tenants. Or you could have a collaboration between, the maker of batteries for electric vehicles with a vehicle designer. So you'd have a research and development team from a major automaker, for example, that might be set up at the technology park, and they might collaborate with the designer of batteries for electric vehicles, and that would be a very natural collaboration taking place there. And in general then as well, tenants often look to benefit from the reputation of technology parks, so they can attract better employees, etc. So they'll say, okay, we're located in this very prestigious technology park. We've access to all of these experts, academic experts and experts in the field of our industry that are located at the park. And then in turn, you can attract better job applicants, etc. So the strength of existing clients leads in turn to the attraction of other strong tenants. Okay, and think of the success of the very first technology park, which was established in the 1950s, which was established by Stanford University. So again, we're seeing the role of the universities here, and it was established in? It was established in California, Silicon Valley. We all know what Silicon Valley is. We all know the enormous appeal of Silicon Valley now. You mentioned the name, and you've got these positive connotations, innovation, high technology, etc. The most fast-growing companies in the world, the most exciting companies in the world. It sells itself to future employees, etc., who want to be associated with that particular technology park.